From day one, our goal has always been to put a cover over this back deck, sun cover, something fabric. We don't really know exactly what we want yet or how we're going to do it, but it's time to start. So I'm thinking it's a big deal. It's 10 feet wide and it's going to be 16 feet long. So for 16 feet lengthwise, if the main beam runs lengthwise down the side of the boat, I'm thinking 4 vertical columns. That will make the span 4 feet or something like that. So 3 of the vertical columns will be on this upper deck, and 1 will be down lower on this bottom deck. So the canopy will actually overhang and cover up a little bit of this bottom. I do have some nice 2-inch aluminum pipe. It was leftovers from handrail. It's anodized aluminum. It's pretty nice and it's very strong, and I think it's like a Schedule 40, so it's strong enough to either weld on or bolt to. So first step here, I'm gonna support the vertical columns right here, and I wanted the bracket to get some strength from the side and some strength from the top, because this top is not the strongest thing in the world. So all I did was I protected my surface with blue tape. I put the side piece on with double stick tape. The top is going to go like this. I'm going to epoxy these together and epoxy that fillet that's on the inside, because this is curved. And I'm going to use this as a mold to cast aluminum brackets. So I'll need 6 of them, 3 for this side and 3 for the other side. And I will put a pipe here before I cast the aluminum, so it'll be part of the mold, and the pipe will slip over this. So a lot of unknowns here in this build, but I know that this is step 1. So I'm going to mix up some thickened epoxy. I'm going to glue this just like you see it. That'll be step. I finished the model for the stanchion supports. They are sized so that this is a scrap of the aluminum pipe I'm going to use. They're sized that the pipe will slip over it, and I'll probably put 2 screws here and 3 here, and I'm going to cast these in aluminum. I'll cast 6 of them, so 3 on each side. This is the rubber mold for the internal part of the canopy base brackets. So I got the rubber portion of the mold is complete. It's the part that's got to make this hollow. That would have been hard to do with plaster. So now I'm going to do 2 pieces of plaster, split it, so this will be 1 piece. That's kind of hard to explain. I'm going to do a 2-piece plaster mold now in addition to the rubber. Okay, the second piece of this ugly plaster form is ready to pour. Plaster is easier to work with than rubber because it won't generally run out of a tiny crack, and 2, it sets really fast, so you can make 3 or 4 or 5 piece mold in 1 day, as opposed to rubber, which takes all day for every piece. I'm gonna pour this, and after lunch I'll wreck it and we'll pour the final piece today. So I took the mold off and I flopped it on its side, and I'm gonna clamp this board on top and fill the cavity, and that'll be the last piece of this mold. Could be the ugliest mold form I've ever made, but it's working, and I made it with everything from the scrap pile. I don't think I cut a single board. So poured the last bit of plaster, give it an hour to set, and I can open it up and see if it's going to work or not. I don't use a lot of plaster molds. It's kind of old school. But even at that, even with the new urethane rubbers and the new different types of mold making materials, plaster from 1,000 years ago, it's still got its advantages. 1, it's dirt cheap. It's the square root of the cost of any of the rubbers. 2, it sets really fast. I made all 3 of these parts in 1 day, and I wasn't really in a hurry. I was doing other things at the same time. Another advantage is to keep the wax from sticking to it, you need to soak it in water. so it's really wet. If you don't soak it, the wax will stick to it and you have a mess. But what that does is this soaked in water, it has a lot of mass. So when you pour your waxes, they set up fairly fast. So if you want to do a lot of waxes in one day, plaster is an advantage of that. The disadvantage is you can't do any undercuts. You won't be able to get the mold off the wax, not even the smallest undercut. So in this case, this little part that goes in the middle, I made out of rubber because I didn't think I'd be able to get the plaster out of the wax without breaking it. So this is rubber, but the rest of the parts are plaster, and they fit together pretty well. I broke some of the corners taking it off before it was fully cured, but it's not going to make any difference. So I need 6 of these. We'll see how many we can get poured this morning. Okay, all 6 of them are poured. Got this done in a short amount of time, and that's the good thing about a plaster mold. It really sucks the heat out of the wax. They're looking pretty rough because the joints between my plaster pieces got kind of brittle because I demolded them too soon, but that's no problem. Just trim them with a hot knife, and we'll be making molds soon. Got 5 there. 1 is still in the mold, letting it cool down. Gotta go. Bye. This is my model for the rear 2 stanchions, and I sprayed it with silver paint because I had silver paint out. I wanted to seal it and it won't dry. So here we are. The silver paint eventually dried and we made another incredibly ugly mold, and we're ready to head to the foundry to pour waxes. This is the simple little mold I made for the brackets that go in the bottom part of the boat. Worked perfectly. It's good old plaster molds. They're cheap and easy. They're just not very durable. But I only needed 2. This is all 8 of the post supports for the top at the back of the houseboat, with 2 dips so far. Step 1 is always the same. Clean up the edges on the pour cups. Step 2 is burning out the hanging hardware, getting that wax to fall out of the cup. The cross section of my gates is pretty substantial in this pour, so I really had to put a lot of heat to it before this wax let go. But it did, so we're going to repeat for the other 3 the same thing. Okay, the last of the 4 cups is burnt out. You can see the plastic cup sitting in the water. This one's ready to go in the kiln to de-wax, and the other 3 are already in the kiln. 4 pieces are in the kiln. I'll bring the temperature up to about 700 or so to get the wax out of them, and then I'll turn it off and put the white insulation against the steel frame on the bottom and bring it up to 1700 degrees for the pour. If I bring it up too hot without the insulation, my bottom warps. It's an inherent flaw in my kiln. Like I said earlier, I've melted aluminum and poured ingots. I have some ingots with the orange paint, which are 100% diesel pistons. I'm assuming that's a high heat resistant, good machinability aluminum. The other ingots are just random, whatever I had. I think I don't need the machinability or the high heat resistant. I'm going to hang on to the orange painted ingots and just use the regular ingots and melt them for this project. Crucible's charged. All those little pieces are scraps. They're extruded aluminum from the window ledge in the houseboat job. And it's my understanding it's not the best aluminum to melt and cast, but it's I'm gonna melt it. It's such a little bit compared to what's going to be in the crucible. It's going to be okay. And typically when I'm doing bronze, I'm in a hurry to light the crucible because it takes the longest to melt the bronze as opposed to getting the molds hot. But in this case, the molds I think are going to take longer than to melt the aluminum. The aluminum melts really fast, so I'm going to hold off on lighting the furnace until I get a little further along with the molds. The wax is pouring out of these molds at a pretty good clip. When it finishes dripping, I'll turn off the furnace and I will move them to the side, put the insulation down to protect the bottom of the furnace, and bring it up to a higher temperature for the pour. So the wax was no longer dripping, so they're de-waxed, but they're not vitrified yet. I need to get them hotter. Also need to get them hotter to make sure the metal flows. So I'm going to pick them up and scoot them to the right side that has the insulation board, and then I'm going to drop the insulation board where they're sitting, and then we'll close the doors to the kiln and fire it back up and bring them up while I'm melting the aluminum in the furnace. Pretty hot. Okay. That's it. Should take 20 minutes to bring the molds up to temperature to vitrify them, and I'm guessing it's going to take about 20 minutes to melt this aluminum, so I'm going to go ahead and light the furnace. Alright, it's burning. It'll be a nasty yellow flame for a little while until it gets good and warm and everything's dry, and I'll keep turning it up. It won't take long. So the metal is melted. I'm going to go ahead and get the molds out of the kiln. I poured, I had a bad feeling in my stomach. It just didn't seem like any metal flowed. It seemed like as soon as I poured, the cup was full. But apparently it flowed. I chipped this one a little bit, and you can see it's all the way at the bottom. And I chipped this one a little bit, and it's good. And now it's cooling and starting to crack. I'm going to go ahead and chip them all out. You can see how much it shrinks when it cools. You see the big crack around the aluminum next to the ceramic shell. Okay, I'm working on sanding down the castings. That flap disc generates a lot of heat, so I work on each one for a little bit till it gets kind of hot to touch, and then I just get another one. I keep rotating them. Should get them all done by noon today. Alright, we had a productive day. I got them cast, got them cleaned of mold, I got them rough sanded, and I got them drilled and countersunk. So tomorrow I'll come put a little finish sand on them, knock off, kind of even out some of the corners, and paint them with some epoxy, and they'll be ready to go on the boat. One coat of epoxy primer on all 8 bases. I'll put one coat of white after this, and then I'll install it and then do whatever touch up we have to do on the boat.